engage with my peers, we get to learn. I get to see that what is happening in Tanzania is not what is happening in Zimbabwe. So how best can I bring those ideas, those solutions to my country? So these women-led programs will actually lead to having a transformed education system that is supported by evidence and documentation of best practices. Then number 5, we need a transformed curriculum that meets the demand of the industry. I'm a recent graduate myself. I graduated last year at the University of Zimbabwe, and the industry is showing me flames because some of the needs of the industry are not being met by my educational history. So we need a curriculum that actually supports the demands of the industry and that promotes academic freedom. I think it is high time we rebrand and rebalance our relationship with technology and nature. We want our girls to be relevant by the time we get to 2050. If we look at the top skills that have been profiled by World Economic Forum that are going to be needed by 2025, we're going to appreciate that it is very important to support skill-related learning and foster critical thinking and innovation. Then number 6, we need to invest in teacher trainees. We cannot talk about girls' education. We cannot talk about making sure that girls complete their secondary education without talking about the capacitation of teachers. Because without the teachers, there is no education to talk about. At some point in my country, we got a situation where schools were open, yes, girls were told to go back to school, but the teachers were nowhere to be found. So if teachers are not capacitated, if teachers are not constantly motivated, then it's the girls that suffers at the end of the day. Because they somehow, look for alternatives. They'll say they are not teachers. So why should we go to school? That's when we'll see girls being forced into early child marriages. That's when we'll see many cases of of teenage pregnancies. That's when we'll see cases of child labor because they are not teachers. So teachers need to be capacitated. Teachers need to be happy about the environment. They need to be happy about the working condition so that the girls that we are fighting for get to at least complete their secondary education. I hope to see a world where education is still considered as an empowerment tool. I always joke with my colleagues where I work that nowadays it's not difficult to convince young people to go back to school when they are surrounded by rich kids. We need to rebrand our education system so that we promote enrollment, we promote democratic participation, so that we also promote inclusivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hazel Jojo, for such an enlightening presentation. Just an interesting statistic that I came across: about 69 million children are out of school in the region due to COVID-19 closures, as well as a range of other factors that we're finding within the region. If I'm to use the words that Hazel was using, she was saying these are very devastating statistics, and indeed it is very devastating. So what we heard from her essentially are some recommendations that she has as a young woman, 23 years, living in Harare, Zimbabwe. And these are her recommendations to those of you who are listening. And she's saying to all of us that we need to hold hands and join forces so that we're able to incite some real change within our region. I particularly enjoyed listening to her. And as a young woman, I'm also very much empowered myself. Mr. Batch, as he was speaking, spoke a lot about inequalities that we're finding within our regions. And one of the best ways for us to combat this is through education of girls. I really love the point on innovation, and I'm hoping that as we continue the conversation, we're able to hear some enlightening presentations just as much as we heard from Ms. Hazel Jojo. So right now we're going to move on to the next presentation for the day. We're going regional. We're going to be hearing from one of the directors from ZANIC. So I'm handing over to Mr. George Hamusunga for him to give us his presentation. And and this is on regional collaborations in ensuring inclusive and equitable education in rural and farming communities for girls and young women. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for this privilege, and greetings to you all. I've been inspired by the presentations that I've listened to so far. And this is important for Africa. This is important for all of us, that such platforms be, encouraged, so that we can, exchange our knowledge, because platforms for knowledge sharing and learning are important for us to be able to do things better and bring about the change that we are looking for. Now, like it has been said, I'm really just going to talk about how we can better collaborate. Girls.
Sorry, Mr. Musunga, we can't hear you. I think you might be muted. Mr. Musunga, are you there? I believe he may be facing a network challenge, so we'll just wait a couple of minutes for him to log in, or for his network to be able to buffer and allow him to speak. All right, so while we wait for Mr. Musunga, those of you who have any questions, you can type your questions within the chat. Would love to hear from all of you. I'm seeing a lot of people introducing themselves within the chat. We're very happy to have you today. I'm going to read a message from Dorcas Chishumba from the chat. And she says, thank you for recognizing the limited access to internet for most young girls. Rural girls and farming communities suffer from lack of technology. The COVID-19 pandemic reversed the gains that had been made towards inclusive and accessible education. And I think that's a very important topic, especially regarding COVID-19. It really allowed us to see those inequalities that are within our countries. Another message from Chanda Chineshe says, wonderful presentation. We need programs in education which recognize a girl child and make her voice be heard. And that's so true. So we're waiting on Mr. Musunga to be able to relog and then speak with us. Keeping the conversation going, one of the most important things that Hazel spoke about was capacitation of teachers. I'm sure most of you would agree that within the region, there isn't enough appreciation for what teachers are doing for young people within our region. And most of the times that's been one of the key things that has been stopping our girls' education from going forward, especially in light of COVID-19. We can continue the chat, continue the presentation. If you have any questions, any additions, any comments, you can type that within the chat box and I'll be sure to read it here.
Hello.
Hello, Mr. Musunga, are you back?
Yes, I'm back. Can I continue?
Yes, you may.
Okay, so quickly I'll go through just 5 key things that we need to take note for us to improve collaboration as we promote inclusive and equitable education for rural girls and young women, especially amidst the COVID-19. I must mention that whatever is good for the COVID-19 period is going to be also very good for the post-COVID-19. So we need not reserve our resources in terms of investing during COVID because we are actually investing for the future. So the first one is that we need to leverage on the recognition of civil society organizations by international and regional state bodies to claim our spaces and use them to promote, inclusive education. Of course, we know that we know that it's important for us to, as civil society, to take note of the opportunities that exist. For instance, now we are having this Ecosoc Youth Forum. This is a very important platform that should bring us together in order to share knowledge and experiences on how we can address the problems that are confounding us, especially those relating to rural girls and women's access to quality education. We also need to look at opportunities, for instance, that are there under SDG, especially by being involved in engaging at the level of SDG Council of Ministers, because we know that the SDG protocol actually does recognize civil society's role in terms of inputting in their various policies. We can also take advantage of CSO's recognition and platforms that are provided, for instance, under the Africa Regional Conference on Sustainable Development, which is convened by the UN Economic Commission for Africa. We can also take advantage of the spaces that are convened under the High-Level Political Forum, which is also convened by Ecosoc. Then secondly, we need to mobilize like-minded CSOs and NGOs from multiple countries, of course, beyond our 3 countries, and collectively establish sub-regional networks that promote inclusive and equitable education for rural girls and young women amidst COVID-19. Now, I must say that we have, of course, the Africa Network Campaign on Education for All and Safer and Global Campaign for Education, GCE, but we do not have sub-regional networks on education. For instance, at the level of SADC. And what would be good for us to see is the fact that the 16 members of, member states of the SADC summit should also be engaged by the various countries. As you know, they rotate their chair. If all the 16 countries, for instance, we were organized into networks and we have our own organization, or network, then we would be able to alternate as well. So that, for instance, this year the chair could have been Malawi, because now all the Council of Ministers are meeting in Malawi. Next year we know that later this year we know that the summit is going to be in DRC Congo. Then we would be happy to have, for instance, our colleagues in DRC create spaces as they organize the summit for civil society to be able to bring on board, issues that require addressing. This is important because as SADC, we need an identity and we need the legitimacy that we need in order for our voices to be held, to be heard, especially at regional level. We also need a shared vision and mission for all of us that pulls us together to bring our energies together to fight for, the promotion of inclusive and equitable education for our rural girls and young women. Then we also need to work together in terms of co-creating and sourcing finances for multiple, country interventions that address inclusive and equitable education for rural girls and young women. And GEAR's initiative is the GEAR initiative is one of the examples that we need to follow. We need to sustain this so that we can start approaching donors at sub-regional level or at regional level, especially under COVID-19, when we know that the resources are scarce because most countries are battling with, the health impact of COVID-19. We also need to target results that transcend our geographical boundaries. If in Zimbabwe the girls are all in school and they are doing well, but in Zambia and Malawi they are not, Zimbabwe also needs to be concerned about what is happening in Zambia, what is happening in Malawi. And this is the Pan-Africanism that our forefathers who fought for independence wanted to see, done in future. Then the last one is that the last one really is that, or the second last, is that we need to create, of course, I've said sub-regional and regional, global online digital knowledge and information exchange hubs for inclusive and equitable education for rural girls. We need to embrace digital technology to bring together our resources and have a single online portal that is a one-stop shop for all the actors or all the advocates, for inclusive and equitable education for rural girls. And this will help us share knowledge on policies that have worked in other countries, and they will help us mitigate the impact of COVID-19 among girls. We also need to share best practices for promoting continuity of learning, as well as policies that have worked, as we have heard in the previous presentation, in terms of the importance of effective policy. Lastly, we need to advocate for regular collection and management of national data and statistics on the impact of COVID-19 on rural girls in our respective countries. Now, in collaboration, what is more important, or what makes the platform more enriching, is the evidence that we bring to the table. So we are saying in our countries, this push for education management systems, that are going to, collect the relevant data that we can bring to the platform to try and address the issues of girls and women. This will equip us, of course, with the right evidence for sharing on collaboration platforms, and it will reveal to us a common cause for collaboration, and it will give us durable solutions for rural girls' continuity of learning amidst COVID-19 that are country-specific, and that will in itself give our colleagues, the leverage to be able to support us in the best way possible. So this is my short presentation that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamusunga, for such an enlightening presentation. It was very, very, very detailed. And I'm sure we all enjoyed listening to his recommendations and what he thought we can do better in terms of collaborating. Some time ago, I think just about last week, I was reading general comments number 3, and it's on economic, social, and cultural rights. And one of the recommendations they have within general comment number 3 is that for countries to be able to better realize economic, social, and cultural rights, which are mostly the rights that you find on the SDGs, or that the SDGs are attempting to realize, these are those particular rights. And for us to be able to realize them, we're not supposed to work by ourselves, but we're supposed to work as regions, as countries, as international communities for us to be able to realize that. So I love that today we can have a conversation on how we can better collaborate as organizations that are in the civil society space, and how we can better lobby for donors and funding at a regional level as well. So it was very interesting, and I love that also the conversation gets to be intergenerational, so we can hear from young people such as Hazel Jojo, and then we can also hear from Mr. Hamusunga. We absolutely needed to hear what you had to say, sir. Thank you very much. Now, moving on to the next presentation in law of how we are going to be intergenerational today, and in law of how this conversation is a youth conversation, and this is Ecosoc 2022, which is a youth forum. We're going to call upon Tadiwa Gondo. She's a trailblazing and activist from Zimbabwe, and she has an amazing presentation to give us, and the title or the topic is Closing the Gap for Rural Girls and Young Women Through Fostering Meaningful Collaborations.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am very delighted to be here with you during this webinar. My name is Tedio Gondo. I am a third-year student at the Harare Institute of Technology, and I'm studying electronic commerce. I'm a very vibrant and passionate peer educator, and I'm also a member of the Say What National Coordinating Committee. So like Nadia said, I'm going to be presenting on closing the educational gap for rural girls and young women through fostering meaningful collaborations in Africa. So to understand the topic at hand, I asked myself, what is a rural girl? So we see to it that the rural girl she is a child who lacks the advantages of modern amenities and facilities such as transportation, electricity, media, hygiene, healthcare, and access to education. In most cases, a young girl's status in the rural areas is related to a mother's status. Women are valued the most when a son is born. Therefore, girl children are considered to be an economic liability in childcare costs such as education itself, dowry costs, and marriage support. She is told to accept how she is inferior to the man. She's molested every 26 minutes and raped every 52 minutes. She spends her time cooking, cleaning, fetching wood and water, caring for children, and working in the fields, sowing, transplanting, and weeding. So all these factors are then what leads to what we call the gap between the boy child and the girl child in the educational sector. So we see to it that at the end of the day, the literacy rate for women in a country like India is 39%, whereas for men it is 64%, and the same goes to any other developing country like Zimbabwe. So that means at the end of the day, we see to it that we still have more men being literate than women, which shows that there is a gap between the two genders. We see to it that the main problems that are faced by girls in rural areas is that they must be enrolled in the school in the beginning of the year, but they are not able to make it till the end. Either they are forced to marry or they are told you're not meant for education. Rather, you're meant to help your mothers in the household. We see to it that we have early marriage and teenage pregnancies, which is keeping girls out of school. And we have pervasive school-related violence, which harms millions of young girls and young women in society, thus creating the gap that we have been talking about throughout this whole session. So the gender gap then comes in such a way that there is the general increase in primary school enrollment, and it is due in part to trends towards early and on-time start of grade 1. However, data on grade progression shows that a large percentage, ranging from between 45 and 75% of children, are behind their target grade. And this is mostly in the girl child. That is that the grade in which they should be for their age is behind the actual target. So although girls perform better than boys and are more likely to be on target than boys, it is boys who are more likely to continue schooling beyond lower secondary level. So a gender gap in education beyond primary level is re-emerging in rural societies. So what needs to be done? First of all, we need to make efforts at all levels to alleviate poverty at the grassroots, as this will undoubtedly overcome the challenge of not sending the girl child to school by parents for reason of poverty. So you see to it that the moment that we eliminate poverty in such families, that means that every girl has an equal opportunity to attend school. The government should take up so as to tackle this madness by providing free, compulsory, primary, and secondary education in all rural areas. Schools should be built, well-staffed, and equipped to provide quality education so that the children can compete favorably with their counterparts from other parts of the country, not just in the rural areas, but also in the urban areas. Parents should also be enlightened to encourage the girl child to acquire basic education, at least that will make her self-reliant and to secure a better future for herself. Governments should also make a promulgation by raising the age of marriage for girls to at least 20 years of age and above, so that at the end of the day, we eliminate child marriages, which stop young girls from going and attending and actually acquiring education for themselves. We should also reduce distances between home and school, making curriculum more relevant to girls by engaging in such initiatives like Give a Girl a Bike initiative, because giving a bicycle to a girl makes it possible for her to travel home safely and focus on her studies. The journey to school becomes safer and faster than before. We should be creating more female teachers and providing facilities and incentives for meeting the needs of girl students. Supplementary income should be provided to families for sending girls to school, so that at the end of the day, they might not be motivated to educate their child, but they know that that incentive will come in to also help them benefit by sending their children to school. At the end of the day, in the education sector, let us not equate the girl and the boy child, for they are not and they will never be the same. The girl child has to fetch water for her whole family. She has to fetch some wood. She has to cook and take care of her siblings. She's not only a student, but she's also a mother, a wife in training, and she has very little time to read and rest. So we can never compare the two because they are completely different. So let's offer extra lessons so that she can catch up on time lost and compete with the other gender. It is not education enough until it's complete. It is time that society stops. Sending the girl child to primary school alone is not, and again, will never be enough. It's depriving them of their rights to education. It's just giving them a mere taste of that right of what education is. So let us understand that if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate the nation, because that knowledge passes on to generations and it creates generational wealth. It's not okay to raise the girl child in a way that tells them to be inferior to the man. The mind is a very powerful tool. And what we tell and train our children today plays an essential role in who they're to become tomorrow. Let us tell them that they are equally competent so that when they go to school, from the moment they set their foot into that classroom, they will know that they have and stand an equal chance to be better than the other gender. Let us focus with a gender lens. Countries themselves and their regional and global partners must ensure they undertake systematic reforms with a gender lens. This means that all the decisions around things such as policies, budgets, hiring, and monitoring must be evaluated with the understanding of their differential impacts on girls versus boys. Gender analysis tools should be systematically used in the development of education sector plan. The future that we want to see, the world that we want to see, is not a fallacy, but only if we become the change that we want to see. So it is time that we start viewing education in a gender lens, as we have seen that the boy child and the girl child will never be equal. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Tadiwa Gondo. She's an amazing activist, change maker here in Zimbabwe. We love that she came and gave us a presentation that she gave us, speaking to us about things that are affecting the girl child. And one of the things that I'm taking home with me is that when you look at the girl child and when you look at the boy child, you can't look at these two children the same way. There is a difference in terms of how they're treated by society. And I like that she was very practical in her approach in giving the recommendations that she was giving us. So now we come to the end of the presentations that we had lined up today. We heard a presentation from Hazel Jojo, then one from Mr. Hamusunga, and then from Tadiwa Gondo. So we can safely say that we've heard a lot of recommendations that are insightful and things that we can easily be able to employ within our alliances, within our collaborations, right, as organizations. Now we're going to open up the conversation to the floor. That is all of you who are watching, all of you who are listening in, all of you who have been typing in the chat box. Let's continue this conversation. Let's talk about what meaningful collaboration looks like. Let's talk about SDG4, how we can build back better from COVID-19, and what are some of the problems and challenges that you have faced in your own country regarding COVID-19? So I suppose before we allow people to then be able to speak, there are some questions that were sent in the chat box, and I'm going to read those questions. So from Kelvin Sequila, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly. He says, I have two questions. Number one, what strategies would you use to ensure equitable access to education for girls and women in rural areas? And the second question is, what measures have you put in place to ensure that the program benefits the intended clients? So I'm hoping that any of our speakers today would be able to answer this particular question. Perhaps we can hear from Mr. Hamusula if he's still here. So the questions are, number one, what strategies would you use to ensure equitable access to education for girls and women in rural areas? And the second question is, what measures have you put in place to ensure that the program benefits the intended clients? Okay, I'm supposing that if he's not in or if he can't hear us in terms of these questions.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, maybe just to try and add, I'm sure others will come through. I think critical to the discussion, I like the presentation, the last presentation, and the emphasis really that giving only primary education to our girls is not enough, because we have seen for many years people talking about, primary education being important, and neglecting the other levels of education. I think that was quite incisive. Now, coming to the questions, I think the most important thing that we need to know is that our policies need to be responsive to the needs of our girls in terms of access and quality. And for us, really, the strategies that we need to use is that we need to undertake a very thorough gender analysis to identify the key barriers that girls face and try to address them, head on. And that is very, very important. Without us using a gender lens, for instance, in the development of our policies, in the development of our plans, in the development of our budgets, then we are not going to achieve anything. So our strategies, and I can say if we have to look at one thing, it is strategy. And the strategy is the difference between failure and success in everything that we do. And so if, for instance, we can, localize the analysis of the barriers that girls are facing and look for local solutions to address them that are going to be sustainable, then that becomes very important. Then the other thing is that, of course, it requires financing. Every time that we give financing, we need to realize that reaching rural girls is not an easy thing. We need to find resources that will ensure that our rural girls, have the opportunity, for instance, to receive the same services that those in urban areas are receiving. And that requires us investing in a lot of, services and products, including investment in ICT for our rural girls, so that they are able to, do research on internet, they are able to, converse with their peers in urban areas and share knowledge and learn from each other. So it's quite important. And also we need to give common platforms. Let's give the rural girls a platform to see the opportunities that lie ahead, so that they can be motivated to fight for the future because they know what lies ahead. If you're in a rural area, the only thing that you would know, which is good for you, is having a child and, deriving the joy from the smile of a child. Let's show our rural girls that there is a better world that they can, enjoy if they actually apply themselves fully to education. So it's important for them to give that synopsis of what life is beyond the rural area so that they can, aspire for higher heights. So those are some of the things that I would submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamusuka, for answering that question so beautifully. What I really like about how you answer the question is on how our solutions have to be organic. So they have to be things that are sustainable and things that are localized to us within the region so that we can ensure that they are indeed effective. I'm going to read some comments that we have from some people within the chat. Liberty Bumbi says, thanks, Tadiwa, with the presentation. It was so powerful, truly. Girls who receive an education are less likely to marry young and more likely to lead healthy and productive lives. I think we can all appreciate the indivisibility of these rights, that when you have SDG4, you undoubtedly then have SDG5, which is gender equality. Chanda Chileshe says, great presentation. Indeed, there is need to sensitive rural parents, the importance of educating a girl child. Most rural parents take it that a girl is in school just to beat the marriage age. That's very interesting and true as well. And Dorcas Tishumba says the issue of child marriages has become topical in African countries. There is need for strong frameworks to be put in place to ensure the girl child is protected. So just so that all of you who are watching and engaged in the conversation know, we're now in the plenary part of today's program. So we're asking that if you have anything to add, any comments, any questions, please be free to just be able to say whatever you want to say within this particular topic regarding SDG4, regarding quality education, and regarding the issue of meaningful collaborations for us to be able to build back better from COVID-19. So while we're waiting for people to gain the courage to speak and let us know what they're thinking, okay, we have a question from Kelvin Nsekwila. I'm hoping I'm saying it correct. Says, is there a room for survivors of harmful practices such as childhood marriages to benefit from this life-changing program? So I will direct the question to some of the participants that are directly involved with the GEA Alliance. So perhaps if we have representatives from GAIO. The question once again is there a room for survivors of harmful practices such as childhood marriages to benefit from this life-changing program? If there are any representatives that are directly part of the GEA Alliance, that is the 4 organizations, Say What, Facets, NAKES, and GAIO. So we'll continue with our presentations as we wait for some of the people within the room to be able to answer this question directly. So part of the topics today was on the issue of collaborating and working together as organizations. And I'm going to ask one of our presenters today, that is Hazel Jojo, for her to be, she's a young activist who's had a lot of experience with working with civil society organizations. She's also a board member of one organization. And so I think she'd be best suited to be able to speak with us today on how she has found collaborating with different organizations in terms of trying to spearhead these different SDGs. So Hazel. The question once again to Hazel is, how has she seen it within the space How has she managed to see within the space that organizations working together are better able to realize a certain goal?
Okay, thank you so much, Nadia, for that question, because I believe that collaborations and networks is the solution, especially when we are dealing with problems that are not only affecting 50 people or 100 people, but this is, as I was listening to the presenter from the other country, I could actually sense that the issue of child marriages, the issue of girls dropping out of school is not just happening in Zimbabwe, it's happening across the continent, it's happening in different countries. So if we come together and collaborate, we can be able to reach a larger area, a larger population, and we can complement our efforts, we can complement our resources, we can come together and making sure that we are working together towards one goal.
Okay, amazing. Thank you very much, Hazel, for answering that. Agnes Nalomba was saying that we must look at her question. We hadn't seen your question, Agnes. Very sorry about that. But she says, nice presentation. May I know if this inclusiveness is just for the so-called normal girls and women in the rural areas? If so, how about those with disabilities? So I suppose the question is, how does this program help, or how does it aid girls that have disabilities, right? That's people with disabilities. I'd like to ask Tadiwa if she can come and speak on how different projects have been done and how these projects are also taking into account girls that have disabilities, or girls that are, yeah. While we wait for Tadiwa to come on, Hilda says, I'm battling with my network. Wanted to finish the session because it's a powerful and one of its kind. Thanks, team. Thank you very much, Hilda, for joining us today. We love that you are part of us today. So the question for Tadiwa is one of Agnes Nalomba's questions, and she's asking, is there discrimination in terms of girls that do not have disabilities and girls that have, or girls that are existing with disabilities, and how exactly they are also aided by the different programs that are attempting to spearhead SDG4?
Okay, so the programs that I have been mentioning throughout my whole speech are inclusive of everyone who is in the name of a girl child. Those that are living with disabilities, those that are living with HIV, everyone who is a female and is in school gets access to the services that I've been mentioning. And as to answer Nadia's question of some of the initiatives that have taken place, as I mentioned before, there is the Give a Girl a Bike initiative, whereby a lot of girls in the rural areas were given bikes. Improvement was seen not only in their performance, but in also their health, because we see to it that girls would get home faster than usual and even safer. They wouldn't be exposed to such things as rape or getting home late. So these are initiatives that needs to be done. They're very small things and they're indirect, but you see to it that the contribution that they bring into the educational life of a girl child is enormous and contributes massively.
All right, thank you very much, Tadiwa, for answering that question. I'd prefer it if you just stay so that you can also answer some coming questions as well. But we still have Kelvin Sequila's question. It has not been answered yet. And the question is there room for survivors of harmful practices such as childhood marriages to benefit from this life-changing program? And we're basically throwing this particular question to the floor and to the audience. So if you're able to unmute yourself and answer this question, if you're from Gaio, if you're from Naples, if you're from Say What, if you're from Facets, the floor is open. Let's answer this question. Is there room?
All right, thanks. I'm Richard Batts, National Coordinator for Girls Activists Organization. Yes, there is an opportunity to the survivors of the harmful practices such as child marriages to benefit from the lifelong learning program. Under GEAR project, as you have seen it, that it's one of the advocacy project, which means that we're also going to do with drawing those girls who are in the child marriages so that they go back to school by ensuring that the school readmission policies that Malawi government, Zambia government, or Zimbabwe government have is put into practice practices. So we are here to support them, whether if we have some who are lacking the school necessities, such as writing materials and the school uniforms, we are there to be reached and we are able to support those girls. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Richard Badge, for answering that question. I'm going to ask Sadiwa to also add on to the question, or to answering the question.
Okay, so personally, I think that there is room for the survivors of harmful practices such as child marriages to benefit from this program in such a way that if you're then going to marry that person at an early age, right, that person will be educated, they have a way of surviving in society, right? So that means the man doesn't have to be the only one who's going to be bringing income into the house. That means the woman is also able to bring in income into the house because she's educated and she's empowered to do so. So at the end of the day, it's not only her who benefits, but it's also the man, and that benefit is also going to spread to the rest of the family, whereby we now know that they can't live under the poverty datum line, and their children can also get a chance to be educated, thus eradicating poverty in such families.
All right. A very enlightening answer that we have from Tadiwa, and that's making the conversation even more interesting. So do not be shy, do not be afraid to join the conversation. It is indeed our plenary session. So if you have anything to say, raise your hand, unmute yourself, or type it in the chat box. So while we're waiting for more comments from you all, I'm going to read some of the things that have been said within the chat box. Richard Changwe says, wonderful presentations indeed. We need policies in our region that will promote more teachers to work in rural areas, making rural areas habitable as in urban areas. As the situation is, our fight will not be won because teachers will prefer working in urban schools to rural schools. And I think that's a very interesting insight as well. That's in keeping with Hazel's presentation as she was talking about how it's very important to ensure the well-being of our teachers, because we cannot talk about SDG4 without including the teachers that are teaching our children. We have another comment that says, great presentation. I feel we need to do more to motivate rural girls. One way is to ensure that more women are deployed to work in rural areas so that they can inspire rural girls. Another is improving infrastructure in rural areas to motivate rural women working in rural areas. Thank you. So we see that this particular comment is just similar to what Bridget Changwe was saying right up there. I'll read one last comment and then we'll get into more questions. Hilda says, we also need programs that are led by the girl children in those rural areas. Personally, I believe in voicing out. Therefore, the girls need to voice out and say whatever they might be troubling them. Inclusion is very important. Therefore, all girls should be included, including those who are disabled. I really like these particular insights. I can speak as one of the board members of FACET, and one of the things that they've been doing is essentially to inspire rural girls by getting some university girls to go up there and speak with them. Recently, some of the girls from the farming communities were at Bindura State University, and I think that's what some of these comments are essentially saying, that they need to be better inspired by getting some girls from the urban areas to go there and be able to speak with them, those who are empowered, of course. Dorcas Ishuma says, to ensure that policies are implemented, there is need for SDG-focused budgeting that promotes inclusivity of education for young girls and women. I'd just like to ask some of our panelists who are here with us, Tadiwa and Hazel, if you have anything to add regarding the comments that I've just read.
I think the comment section has been saying everything that I would really agree to, and I'm really happy that people are coming in the chat box, because that shows that everyone is listening and we're conversing properly. So thank you so much to everyone who's been commenting in the chat box, because I agree with you.
Okay, that's simply amazing. In talking about how we can have SDG-focused budgeting that is promoting the inclusivity of education for young girls and women, one of the things that has been spoken about is how difficult it is regarding COVID-19 for there to be budgeting for some of these things, such as education, because of the focus on health and all of that. Do you think you can get into how COVID-19 has essentially affected education? I'm sure your presentation was covering that. But from what you know and on the ground, and being a young girl who's living in Zimbabwe, what has that been like?
I think COVID-19 has impacted education in such a way that is highly detrimental, because we see to it that if we're to speak about the girl child, especially in the rural areas, one of the most common characteristics of such children is that they don't even have the knowledge of ICT tools. So COVID-19 then coming in and people trying to cover for the effects that it was bringing in. Schools were now adopting to Google Meet, to online classes and whatnot. So people didn't really consider the fact that yes, this is the initiative that they're bringing forth, but it was as if we're applying the right medicine, but to the wrong patient. So at the end of the day, we see to it that COVID-19 greatly impacted education, especially for children in the rural areas, because at the end of the day, if we try to look at it, they didn't even have all those gadgets to be able to access the education as a facility using technology. So at the end of the day, it was just like not giving them their right to education because they were not able to access education.
All right, thank you very much, Sadiwa, for answering that question. Another thing that we're finding within the chat box is how people are saying that we can't realize SDG4 without noticing that we also need teachers that are motivated to then work within these rural areas. So if you're within the chat box or if you're listening to this particular presentation today, then tell us how exactly you think that as CSOs you can work towards ensuring that we have teachers that are being deployed into these rural areas, that these teachers are not only motivated, but they're also skilled to be able to work with these young women. So if you're in here, please do not be shy. Let's get the conversation going. Let's talk about it. The floor is open to all of you guys. Our panelists, our guests want to be able to hear you speaking, so let's engage. The question that we're throwing to the floor is, how can we ensure that in focusing on SDG4, we're also managing to get teachers to be able to work in these rural areas? How do we motivate them as civil society organizations, as the organizations that are represented within the group? Faith Chiwenda, yes, will allow you to speak.
Hello everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. First of all, I must say the presentations were really brilliant. We're really raising issues which are very important in as much education is concerned. I have a question. The question really is going around culture and its effect on education. Much as we're talking about policies and how we're going to make sure that we have an inclusive education for our girls mainly, I have a concern. Culture really has an effect. For example, we're talking about the teachers, deploying them to the rural areas. But then culture, they has a lot to say about them, the way they conduct themselves. So my question really is, how are we going to help each other to handle such issues that culture brings to our table? For example, issues of gender, culture has an effect on that as well. So I really have a concern on that. I would like to know how we would tackle such issues, because political ideologies may change over time, but culture is really deep-rooted in most African communities. Thank you.
Ms. Chiwenda, if I may ask where you are from?
Hello, I'm from Malawi. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. We love that you're in the chat today. If I could ask someone from Gaio to ask the question. And then I'm sure that we can then weigh in. But in terms of the question, okay, in terms of the question that she was asking, what essentially we're hearing is that how do we tackle these harmful ideologies that are being brought forward, right? If there's anyone who wants to answer this question and directly address the question, please do not be shy, let's do that. Do we have anyone from Gaio in the room? Okay, Mr. Batch, if you're here, are you able to answer the question?
Maybe I come in to just give my perspective.
Yes, please.
She brings a very important question. This actually is something that currently is being discussed. The issue of role models being taken from like urban areas to go and teach in rural areas. And we think that those girls are going to look up to them. Sometimes when you look at what countries now are doing, you will notice that that in some cases has not worked very well. It works better if, for instance, children are able to see someone who they grew up with, you know, rise and become a teacher, become a head teacher, and maybe become a district education official. Then they will know that even them from the background they come from, it is very possible for them to achieve that. And that is very important to think about. So in some countries now, you will see that they have decentralized the recruitment process of teachers so that teachers can teach as close to their communities as possible so that they can also be role models within their own culture. Some actually have gone to an extent of holding interviews for teachers within the schools because they know that if they do that, when there is a vacancy at a school, that person is going to stay at that school for a long time because they know, you know, the area and they know, you know, how it feels to live in that particular community. So those are the things that we need really to advance. But suffice to say that we are living in a global world. We cannot restrict people to stay in their own communities. But suffice to say that we need also to grow role models within our communities so that our children can look up to them. I think that's the bottom line.
All right, so thank you so much, Mr. Musunga, for weighing in on that particular question and for showing us why it's so important for things to be homegrown. I see that Mr. Chansa, Gear Alliance, has raised their hand, so the floor is open to you, Mr. Chansa.
Nadia, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to also respond to the question asked about teachers, especially female teachers going into the rural areas. We have noticed that the three countries, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi, have similar challenges actually, especially in terms of teacher motivation, where you find that our girls in rural areas have no female role models in terms of teachers, simply because most of our rural areas have extremely difficult social terrains, where you see our female teachers actually sleeping in grass-thatched houses, areas without network, without radio, TV receptions. And this is not good for our region. And no wonder we are saying that we need to work together and also make our governments accountable so that the treaties, the binding treaties that they become part to, for example, the SDG protocol on education, that is very instructive for our countries to actually spend not less than 20% are respected, so that when they are respected, we can have better accommodation for our teachers in rural areas. We can have better school environments for our teachers. We can have teachers who are motivated. so that when we send our female teachers to these rural areas to be role models for our girls and young women, they stay there. As Mr. Amsunga was saying, Zambia is now recruiting, in the process of recruiting 30,000 teachers. And when we don't improve the conditions of service for rural schools, then these teachers are going to leave those schools to get into towns. So as stakeholders, as gatekeepers, as it were, we have a mammoth task to work together, make sure that conditions in rural areas for teachers are improved in order for our teachers to go and stay there for our girls. Thank you for the chance.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Chansa, for weighing in on that. We're going to read a couple of comments. Those who are raising your hands, please continue raising your hand. I'll just read these comments and ask the ladies here to weigh in, and then we'll take some more questions. Chanda Chileshe says, being in a rural Zambia and teaching these girls, most of them do not have role models and families. This is because when a girl reaches a certain age, parents abandon them for school requisites. They start sourcing for themselves. In the process, a girl falls pregnant and they leave school just like that. So you'll find that marriage and pregnancy has the same age. Girls have no one to admire in terms of completing school. There's someone who has raised their hand, so we'll allow you to speak. So the name we're seeing here is Susan Luchembe.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Susan Luchembe from Zambia, a member of NACAVE. I think my contribution is that I think what Mr. Chance has mentioned, he has talked about infrastructure that can motivate women who work in rural areas so that they act as motivators to the young women and girls in rural schools. Apart from that, I think governments also need to look at the issues of putting good numbers of women in decision-making positions. That can also contribute to the motivation, because we find that a woman or a girl, they will go up to maybe PhD level, but they will remain in lower positions in any ministry or sector of government. So it's also important that women are recognized and given decision-making positions so that the young girls and young women can look forward to that. Because once a girl child is educated, they have these papers, but they are not being promoted. That also demotivates the young ones to say, even if I go to school, I do this and that, you find that I will not be promoted. So it seems as if the world is just for men and not for women. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Luchembe, for that insightful comment that you're adding. I'd like to throw the questions back to Hazel and Tadiwa in terms of looking at it from a youth perspective as young women who are essentially just, beginning in terms of their activism, but they've already made so much impact. In terms of this issue about having teachers also being able to spearhead SDG4, which is something that you raised in your presentation, from a youth perspective and knowing your peers and your young people, what exactly can we do in the civil society space as young people to ensure that we're able to realize SDG4 by collaborating also with teachers in ensuring better situations for them when they go to these rural areas?
Okay, thank you so much, Nadia, for raising that. I think that us as young people, number one, we need to know the struggles that the teachers are facing. And also, one of the previous presenters talked about doing a research demographic analysis to know the actual barriers that students who are in rural areas and also teachers who are in rural areas are facing, so that when we come up with solutions, when we come up with policies, there are policies that are mainly targeting the needs of the teachers and the students there. Because usually what we do when we are here in the urban areas, we talk about, oh, we don't have internet, or we don't have iPhones, or we don't have, labs in our schools. But we actually don't know that the teachers there who are there in rural areas and the students who are there in rural areas do not actually have access to textbooks, do not have access to pens, do not have access to basic sanitary services. The girls do not have anywhere that they can, dispose their pens. So we don't know all of that. So what is important is for us to be on the ground. Someone was saying that girls in rural areas do not have role models. Let us go there, ask the role models who are here in the urban areas. Let us go there and talk to them. Let us go there and know what is happening on the ground. So that by the time we come back, by the time we stand on this podium, by the time we have access to policymakers that they don't have access to, at least we have first-hand information. At least we know what is going, because nowadays we just talk rural women don't have this, rural teachers don't have this, but we are not there. We are here. So we need to go there as civil society organizations. We need to go there as activists like me, like myself. We need to go there and be on the ground so that we know what they are actually facing.
All right, I really love that you're bringing up that particular point, because as young people, we know that there's a lot of apathy amongst young people in terms of issues that are affecting the greater scheme of how our countries are running. I see something from Petronella, says solution, the advocacy should spread and teach laws. Laws will matter because they have power to encourage positive cultural shifts in gender norms and values, and also bring mindset change to rural areas. I'd also like to ask Tadiwa, I love that point, Petronella. Thank you very much for adding the issue of legislation and how being literate in terms of understanding legislation is very important in terms of shifting the culture and shifting the gender norms that we find within these particular areas. I'd also like Tadiwa to weigh in on the very same question in terms of how young people can ensure that they combat this issue of apathy amongst young people, because as a young leader, you are literally leading a number of young people as well. So how do we rally young people to also be able to engage in the civil society space and ensure that SDG4 is realized?
All right, so to answer that very beautiful question, I'd like to start by reminding everyone here that the world is dynamic and it's changing in time and again. Gone are the days where you would still find great value in saying you want to be an accountant, because nowadays, if you become an accountant right now, you know that when you step into the world, you're going into a large pool of accountants, right? So we need to accept how life has changed. You don't need to necessarily have a role model for you to be great, because if you're going to base your motivation on having a role model, that means you're going to be looking at success through the window of that successful person. Yet success is not necessarily defined in any way, it's dynamic, right? So I would really encourage young people out there, especially those in the rural areas, that you can be your own role model. You don't have to necessarily have someone to look up to, because if you see that there is no one that you can actually look up to in your family, you can't look up to your mom because she doesn't want you to be educated, that should give you a motivation to want to be a different person, to want something that is different for your kids. So that right there within you is where that motivation should begin. Because if you become your greatest influencer, that means that you have a passion that won't die quickly, because a role model might make a mistake and then the next day you don't have one and you stop moving. That is not something that is proper. So you need to also learn to be your own role model. And the fact that as young people, we are the ones who are facing problems. I'm a girl child in the rural areas. Okay, I don't have a cell phone. Okay, I can't necessarily read because I'm always doing tasks at home. There are so many organizations out there that want to see change, especially in the educational sector. But if we don't cry out to show them what exactly that we are facing, then they will never know. So I'm encouraging young people out there to try to make full utilization of such capacities that allow them to bring change by telling them what they're going through, so that at the end of the day, we can help each other. I like how everyone was commenting in the chat box about the government, about the families. That shows that at the end of the day, it's not only a fight for the government, it's not only a fight for the facilities that are concerned in that, but it is also our fight for the youth. We need to contribute greatly to make sure that at the end of the day, we see the change that we want.
All right, thank you very much, Tadiwa, for answering that. I think in terms of collaborations that we've been talking about, this takes a new shift and a new understanding of what we mean by meaningful collaboration. So it's not just collaborating with other CSOs, but it also means working within those communities. I see Susan Chilembe, I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly, has raised your hand. Would like to hear from you as well.
Good afternoon. I think I already said what I needed to say. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for weighing in on the conversation. And we love that there's been a lot of engagement regarding the particular topics at hand today. So we were talking about meaningful collaboration and how from the weighing in that we've been getting from the different sides, we've basically been made to understand that in terms of collaboration, it's not just organizations collaborating, but there's been a lot of talk about community work and people within the communities and people within the families also standing in as role models. Would also like to just still throw the question on how we can better realize this issue of meaningful collaboration. I'm sure there are some organizations that are within the chat that we've not really heard. So if you still have something to say, something to add on in terms of weighing in on the conversation, let's talk about SDG4, let's talk about quality education, let's talk about teachers and how we can ensure that they're better provided for. And also this issue that has arisen of having role models and what we think from the conversation, there is a dichotomy where some people are saying that, no, these role models have to be homegrown, have to be organic. And some people are essentially saying that if we don't have these homegrown organic role models, then let's go as civil society, let's go into those areas, let's provide these role models. If we're still weighing in, let's talk. We have about 5 minutes to still be able to engage in this conversation. Any new ideas, any new thoughts, we can weigh in on the conversation. It's very important. SDG4 quality education. Chanda Chileshi says, this is a very good program. My phone is draining. I'm sorry, can't continue now. Thank you very much for joining us. We had a very good time having you and listening to what you were weighing in on. Okay, Aubrey Chizi Wisano also says that they're following and that the program has been great. Thank you very much for following. That has been awesome. All right, I suppose we can then go on to the last part of our program today. As we've heard from the different presentations, we've heard from Taliwa, we've heard from Hazel, we've heard from Gaia in terms of the opening remarks. We've also been able to hear from Mr. George Hamusunga in terms of his presentation, and there have been a lot of questions, a lot of answers from all of you, and we're very grateful. Now we'll end our plenary session and then go straight into our closing remarks. We're going to be hearing
Okay, thank you so much, Nadia, for a very well done job. Nadia, our moderator, thank you so much. Let me also thank Ecosoc on behalf of GEA Alliance for giving us this space to mobilize for this event. This event was extremely important under the theme COVID-19 recovery, youth taking action for a sustainable future. So we are very happy that we mobilize people from Malawi, from Zambia, and also Zimbabwe. And all the countries around. It was great to hear great presentation from Mr. Musunga, the Executive Director of Zambia National Education Coalition. Thank you so much, sir, for coming through. It was also great to listen to Tadiwa from SEWAT and also Hazel, a gender activist. We think that what we've done today, especially looking at what we need to do beyond this COVID pandemic in closing the gaps in terms of education for girls and young women in rural areas is very, very important. And what must be for access to quality education, specifically similar. I like what Hazel said that our girls lack opportunities and they are confronted by vicious factors such as early marriages, early pregnancies, and these must be fought by all of us. Teacher motivation is very, very key. She ended by prescribing what all of us must do to fight for a more just and democratic space where all of us, especially the girls, must collaborate. Mr. Msunga was candid in urging all of us to leverage the fact that our CSOs are very much well recognized at national level, at regional level and continental level, and what an opportunity for all of us to maximally use these important spaces at SADC, at regional level, at continental level, and also at a global level, especially where you talk about the high-level political forum, where Ecosoc is going to make sure that young people are given the space to speak out, and also that all of us as CSOs must share a vision. And I think that as GEA Alliance, we have led the way. We want this trajectory to proceed. And how I wish we can have another webinar where we can take down the action plans on how SADC is going to be mobilized. We have 16 countries with similar challenges. Why can't we mobilize and make sure that we speak with one language? We have one vision, one mission, so that we share resources, we share ideas, and we make sure that our girls and young women have space to actually acquire this very important public good. Mr. Msunga went on to talk about the need for us to use technology to mobilize like-minded individuals and also CSOs, share knowledge, policies, and also best practices. He ended by making sure that he did not mince his words for a collaborative effort, a united voice for our girls, and also for better education management systems, so that we can have better data collected for evidence-based advocacy. This is very, very important. Tadiwa came in to tell us who a young girl is, a rural girl is, and I agree that these are girls in Malawi, Zimbabwe, Zambia, and elsewhere in the region who lack modern amenities and facilities. And one of these facilities, one of these services is the quality education, which is offensive to SDG number 4. And these bottlenecks of poverty, literacy, and the lack of education are things that concern all of us. And I dream of a day, which is also the dream of the GEA Alliance, where we are going to have a qualitative system, systems of education in the region that allows our parents to realize that girls have a right to education. The girls also must be inspired by a teacher who has excelled, by a minister or a president who has excelled. And this, we must make sure that we advocate, as Madam Luchembe from Southern Province echoed, that we need to give chance to our women actually to excel. And this now gives me an opportunity to thank all the participants, those who took part in this meeting, for a job well done, for questions asked. This is what it should be. As citizens of SADC, we must get worried, we must be moved, we must be shocked that our girls are not able to access education, and yet we know that education is the best equalizer. We need to hold our governments accountable at personal level, at societal level, at regional level, so that together we win as a region. So thank you so much, Moderator Zanek. Thank you, First Advance, for a job well done. As Gear Alliance, we are very happy, and we hope that we are going to organize another platform for all of you to take part. Thank you so much. God bless you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aaron Chansa, for those closing remarks. And thank you so much for wrapping up our program for today. But before we go, there's something very important that we need to do. So if you are still there, please could you kindly turn on your video so that we can take a screenshot of all of you. We want to see your wonderful, beautiful faces. So if you're there, please can you just smile and yeah, let's see your faces. Let's see what you're looking like today. Just want to take a screenshot. It's wonderful seeing all your faces. Thank you very much. So we'll be taking the screenshots in a few seconds. Let's continue showing our faces. Thank you. Are we ready? Okay, so we're just waiting for a couple more people to show their faces. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. You made this webinar the webinar that it became. Thank you for all your insights. For everyone who was weighing in. We should be taking our screenshot any second now. Hello, Mr. Chibwe. It's amazing seeing all of you. Are we ready to take our screenshots? Okay, so let's smile, say cheese. Cheese. And I think we have it. Do we?
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, everyone, for joining this side event at Ecosoc 2022. There will be more engagement, more forums that are happening until the 20th of April, I believe. So please continue to join the conversations on realizing our SDG goals. Thank you all so much for joining. You are free to exit the chat room. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
The recording has stopped.